I will see if I can figure out how to do the slideshow.
All right, I give you permission, and I just realized I didn't start the recording, so sorry. I just started it. We're
That's
recording
okay.
this meeting now.
We'll have.
Could have waited till I was done. That's
Yeah.
fine. Share screen. There we go. And let's do that one. And slideshow, there we go. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about the budget process because we are, it is upon us. This is the time of year where we really need to sort it out. And I am Erin Purcell. I'm one of the co-treasurers. So I'm going to be one of the people deeply involved in this process. But it's very important that we have the entire current board and as much of the community as possible involved in this process because we need to make decisions. They're important decisions. And when we talk about budgeting, I know that most people are thinking this is all about the money, but there's more to it than that. Everything that we do is done by volunteers, and probably volunteer time is an even more scarce resource than money for us. So I want people to be thinking about what is it that we should be spending our time and money on as a community, and I'd really appreciate everyone who has any thought at all about what we should do more of, what we should do less of, what we're not doing that we should be doing to reach out and participate. All right, so some exciting things for the current budget process. At this point in the year, we usually have done our major fundraiser and we have an idea of how much we're going to spend because PTA bylaws that are the state organization requires us to live by their rules, which means the money we raise in one year tells us how much we can spend the next year. We are very late with our major fundraiser. It's going now, so everyone please, feel free to send a check or whatever. It's not completed, but this has been such a wacky year, and we have very healthy reserves, and I'm quite comfortable just setting a number of how much we can spend and dipping into our reserves if needed, and estimating how much we think we'll get from the fundraiser and from the jogathon. I feel like there's a great deal of uncertainty about what school's going to look like in the fall. I'm assuming it'll be closer to the before times than it is now. But I think just like last year, it's going to be right up to the wire to really understand what it's going to look like. So we'll be making educated guesses as we plan for what we're going to do. The good news is we still have strong partnerships in the community that are incredibly supportive. Again, with providing funding, but also providing volunteers and supplies and materials. And we've got the healthy reserves, which allow us to go ahead and make a plan, even though we haven't completed our fundraising for the year. To orient ourselves, I'm going to show you what the last normal budget looked like and what the current year budget looks like. We used to bring in a whole lot of money and have a whole lot of money to spend, and our fundraising has dropped way off. But fortunately, again, we also have a bunch in the bank in reserves that we can dip into, and we will. The smaller column over here shows what we're guessing this year would look like in terms of spending. We tried to preserve the things that we thought would be really important, like making sure we could reimburse teachers for any out-of-pocket costs. And we, absolutely cut community events, figuring we wouldn't be able to do the kinds of things we usually do. The way it's actually played out is almost, the vast majority of the money that we've spent this year has been either giving garland or family support. And all of that has been money that was donated to be used only for those purposes. So we're coming in way under budget in terms of the money where we actually get, to direct it. And teachers continue to not really ask for a lot of reimbursement. So hopefully they're not sitting on all the receipts, but what that has meant is that our reserves actually grew this year so far. But the usual process for coming up with a budget, the usual lazy process, is you just look at what you did last time, make small tweaks. I don't think that's going to work for us this year. So what have we spent money on in the past? So the big buckets have been what we call in class, and that's reimbursements for teachers. That's classroom teachers. That's also specific carved out budgets for art, music, library, PE, recess, technology, and I think that's it. There's a school supplement, which is sort of a block grant that we give to the school, and they use it in ways to fund important needs, and it can only be used in certain ways, but it also gives Principal Liu some flexibility. In the past couple of years, tutors has usually been where it's gone, and I don't remember if that's where it's going again for next year, but we have in the past done all sorts of community events because that's been a critical part of PTA's mission, is building community and strengthening the bonds between all the families and educators and the staff. And we've not been able to do that. That might feel like it's something that's been sorely missed. If we can do it next year, maybe that's going to be a priority. Student programs, which would include field trips, 5th grade camp, assemblies, style, which is a fun writing program, if I remember correctly. Oops, go back. Oh, I don't know how to go back. And there we go. Art from the Heart, school play, which we have done in some years past, but not in the last couple of years. And then enrichment, which has allowed us to do some, additional programming or helping families who would not be able to otherwise access the after school programs. So that's the kinds of things we've done in the past. Maybe some of those things are more important than ever. Maybe some of them seem less important. In terms of planning for next year, we need to, as a group, as a community, figure out what are our priorities. And again, keeping in mind that volunteer time is probably even more limited than money. How are we going to deploy our resources towards those priorities? And it's very important to me that we get community input. I would very much like to see as many people as possible join for, we'll do 1 or 2 calls in the next few weeks, or Zoom meetings to talk about these things. But I'll also invite anyone to email me directly, or anyone on the board if they've got thoughts about what we should be doing. And I appreciate everyone for being here tonight and for supporting the school. And this would be a really great way for us to make sure that we're doing what the community wants. It's always hard when there's only a small group of people speaking up, and we wonder if we're really serving the community the way we ought to. Thanks.
Thanks, Erin. Any questions or comments on that for the time being? All right.
Oh, I have a question.
Okay.
Thanks, Erin. That was really great. And thanks for all the work you're doing in this, like you said, crazy year. I might have missed this part, but I'm just wondering, I think we talk a lot about the way these things get decided, and do we have an idea already of how we are going to get community input for these things? What do we need to do next to actually get community input that's wider than our presentation tonight?
Thank you. Great question. My best ideas are to have 1 or 2 Zoom meetings that are just open invitation for people to join in the conversation about what they want to see. And also to invite other, for people who aren't available at those times or don't really like to do Zoom, to submit, preferences and ideas through board members or by email.
Hey, can I jump in with, I think that building community is something everybody's pretty desperate for at this point, and maybe we could even make it like a contest where we get creative ideas of something that we could spend money on to bring people together safely at this point, which is a developing world and a developing landscape. But I don't know if we had if we threw it out to all the parents and all the kids, what kind of event would make you feel connected to everybody else at Leschi right now? Maybe we buy everybody a really loud instrument and we play it all at the same time and see if we can hear it. I don't know, something, I don't know, but we could get creative.
And I think creating a form, and instead of, in the past, we send out that sheet that's check the things that are your priority. Instead, just say go big. What are your top 3 dream things that Leschi would do for the families? We want to hear it all, and just leave it open-ended. So instead of being that form, let's hear other things than we've put in the past. I think it could be interesting what we get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the closest way to approximate what we started doing the last couple of years is at events, putting up a whiteboard with more free form, right? Where people could say what do you want? More of this, or whatever. The challenge, coming to Kelly's question, is always still just really getting the word out and getting people's attention. So we'll rely on all of you for starting with anyone who's here. Tell 2 people who weren't on the call, hey, these next few weeks are critical. But beyond that, beyond Facebook, beyond just our limited listserv, Mr. Liu will be annoying because we'll ask you to send things out to the more expansive listserv you have access to, and through talking points through text.
Oh, I'd be happy to.
And I think we'll work on some pretty targeted and specific messaging saying this is, your input matters. And this is the time really to shape what next year could look like. And, that's it. We're going to have to build in flexibility because we don't know what exactly it will look like next year.
Can we ask teachers to get opinions too? I mean, they have the relationships with families. Have them really push, here's the form, fill it out, get excited about it.
Or even say it's different this year.
Yeah.
Form is different than it's ever been. Now's the time. All creative ideas welcomed.
Yes, totally.
I think also maybe since I feel like I've never been able to drop off or pick up. So the idea that I'm at both of those would be a nice way if we could kind of canvas with the parents that are dropping off. I know that's hard because we're keeping distance, but if we can just kind of, as PTA members, kind of try to talk to people as we're dropping off and picking up too, in a concerted effort to be hey, did you get your form? This is a really cool, chance to talk about how we're going to budget our money for next year.
Great. Yeah, that's a good idea. I think we can do outreach at even the various community centers where kids who may not be in person, but are also, or some are, but also doing remote school from COI, et cetera. So
Teachers have been so awesome and consistent this year too with those weekly newsletters.
Yeah.
Maybe even just an ask that in one of the week's weekly newsletters, it goes at the top. Cause I know for some of our teachers, they're amazing and some of them get really long. So if it's at the bottom, I'm a little bit done reading. I mean, of course I read every word.
All
Can
right,
we
well,
do a random prize too? A lottery that will give a gift card or something. draw a lottery like once a week.
Sure. Get a free face mask. Oh wait, you get that anyway. Okay, I want to thank you, everybody. Let's keep those ideas coming and drop them to me or Erin or anyone on the board or in the chat. I want to leave time for Mr. Liu to give his presentation, so we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Okay. Here we go. Well, thanks everyone. So I mean, just, yeah, thank you for your time tonight. Support, flexibility. There's just been so many changes how school happens, and we're just like in this new phase of schooling. And you know, in-person learning has gone relatively smoothly, and again, because of patience and cooperation, as well as really lots of hard work from the staff to prepare and get things ready. And I know this came up earlier, I don't have the answers yet as to what school will look like in the fall, but I'm going to share that with you as soon as I hear what that's going to be. And as a staff, we've already started talking a little bit about, you know, what is the work that we can do to plan for next year, while not spending time on things that might not be, you know, implemented. So it's kind of a unique challenge for this year, but and I also want to just take a little bit of time to address the equity concerns that are still present in how school is run for this year, and that I share, as well as I think many of you have, just a number of concerns regarding transportation. Regarding the in-person learning models, 100% remote models, they don't work for all students. And a lot of times right now it's dependent on the family schedule, as well as just other challenges that we face as a school and a community. So I just want to make sure I name that. So for this presentation, I'm going to try and keep it as short and sweet as possible. The purpose is, this is like an initial draft. I'm sharing it with you. I've already shared a draft of this with the staff as well, and I've asked for feedback, as well as just ideas moving forward, because again, you know, I can have an idea of what the vision is, but I can't do the work myself, and so it's going to be important that everyone that we get ideas and input from everyone. So really around this, just long-term planning and having a vision, we need something that our staff and our community can use as an anchor for our goals and our vision, so that we can align on our work around student academics, social emotional learning, behavior skills. And so we can make that align with what we know is excellence that our students already have. The second point, it talks about, you know, we really need to make sure we're retaining teachers and staff and avoiding high turnover at Leschi. Title I schools typically struggle with retaining teachers and staff. And Leschi has had these challenges in the past. And for those of you who don't know the statistics, about half of all teachers leave the profession and never return within the first 5 years of teaching. And half of all principals leave the profession never to return within the first 3 years of leading. And just recognizing that this year, with all of its unique challenges, that, you know, burnout is definitely happening and is a thing that teachers and staff are experiencing, just due to lots of changes in learning models, lots of changes that are happening. So just recognizing that it's really important that we don't have lots of high turnover all the time. And then the last point really is, you know, the goal of this work is just to make sure that everybody feels positive about being at Leschi, because without that, students and adults, we don't learn if we don't feel positive and safe about where we are and where we work and where we learn. So that's a big foundational goal for this work and this vision. Now, you know, I bring the next two slides. The purpose is really just to look at the realities. And of course, knowing that this is showing one specific point, a data point. But what I'm also doing here is I'm actually working on avoiding language such as opportunity and achievement gaps, because it's deficit-based language. And so I want to try and use different language, especially around, for example, like aligning what we know is student excellence, or what we know is the excellence of our Black students, of our students of color. And so, yeah, I'm just going to say that. You'll notice that there are certain groups that don't show up in this graph. And it's because of the N size, or there aren't enough students at Leschi in certain racial groups to be statistically reliable. And that's why it doesn't show up in this graph. But really the overall trend is the same. And that is that students of color, Black, Indigenous, and students of color, they don't perform as well. And it's not aligned with their white peers. And the majority of students of color at Leschi consistently scored below standard on standardized assessments. So really the work around this and around school improvement is about that success will look like, what it will look like is that all students will perform at high levels on assessments, and not just standardized assessments. Now, I do want to address the single data point issue. And so there are other ways to look at the data as well. And so this slide shows student growth percentiles. And student growth percentiles, it's a way in which we look at multiple years of student growth. So we know that standardized assessments are problematic for many reasons. And only looking at one data point is also problematic. However, student growth percentiles give us a different lens on the data. So even though this data is still about the state assessment that 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders take, it does show things in a different way, and I'll explain in just a minute. So student growth percentiles, they compare students who scored the same on the state standardized tests. So an example is a student who scored a level 2 or approaching standard would only be measured with other students who also scored a level 2 on the same assessment in the same grade level. And it would track their progress over multiple years and see how much progress that student is making in comparison to the same students who scored the same in the previous grade level. So what this graph shows is that half or over half of Leschi students are not making as much growth over multiple school years in the same way that other students in Washington State have made over the same period of time. So I'm starting with this as a way to say we have a lot of work to do at Leschi. And it's important that we address the realities of how this is. And this data also plays out when we talk about other assessments, not just standardized assessments. So now I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about what are the things that we're going to do to address this, and kind of what is my vision. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to ask you for your feedback about the presentation, about the things that I've shared, as well as any questions or wonderings that you have. And I'm going to start with behaviors. So a lot of the work around behaviors is around positive behavior interventions and supports, which we call PBIS. And I don't know if you've heard it so far. You might have, just because my school assemblies and other Other like classroom teacher lessons and all of that are getting into your homes this whole school year. But we have 3 school pillars or school rules, which are be respectful, be responsible, be safe. And we make that really easy for students to learn and to know. And we want to make sure that that's incorporated into all areas of the school or all areas of the remote learning environment. And really, PBIS work is focused on making behavior expectations clear and consistent for students and for the adults at Leschi, because a lot of the work around PBIS is making sure that all of the staff are aligned about the expectations and the rules for our students. So when they hear different rules and expectations from different adults in the school, that's when we see unexpected behaviors happening, because students don't know what the actual rules are, or they're trying to adjust based on whichever adult is supervising them or which adult they're talking to. And so the work around PBIS is really around making sure everything is clear to everyone, so that we take the guesswork out of how everyone should, what the rules are and the expectations are for everyone in every school space. Another big part of this is that for kids and adults, behavior is a form of communication. And as a school staff, we need to figure out the reason behind student behaviors so we can correctly respond to the unexpected behaviors. So we have a plan in place where we're going to be starting to teach students what are the expectations for the different areas of the school. And we do this especially at the beginning of the school year, after long breaks, like winter break, midwinter break, spring break, just to reinforce and remind students what those expectations are. There's also a flow chart, a behavior flow chart that's already been rolled out to staff that shows what are the procedures when there's an unexpected behavior that comes up, as well as what are the supports that are provided whenever there's unexpected or challenging behaviors. And then staff also have a clear kind of list of what behaviors are expected as teacher or staff managed behaviors in the classroom, and then what behaviors are office managed behaviors, because there is a difference. And we need to make sure that, again, there's clarity and alignment with the staff and that everyone knows, what the process is. Now, for the last point, part of PBIS work is also gathering behavior data. And this is done in order to find patterns so staff can be proactive with behavior rather than reactive. Now, I know there's some concerns around gathering behavior data, and that all the data is confidential. It's used internally by staff members, and we do analyze it regularly for bias. And we do look at the trends as far as, are we only keeping the data on students of color, students who receive special education services? That is all actually disaggregated based on the data that we collect. So here's an example of how we do this. So let's say a student starts acting out in the classroom and teacher addresses the behavior or calls for support. We can address the behavior and move on. And let's say the next day the same thing happens, the behavior happens again. And it goes on for a while. So with the behavior data, we would gather the information about the date, the time, the type of behavior, the location, the setting, the classroom response. And really important is how much time did the student miss from their peers? Because the goal around all of this is making sure that we maximize the amount of time that students have with their peers in their classroom learning. And then after we gather that, all the data, we see patterns emerge. And for this particular example, we might notice that the student acts out around the same time every morning. And then we look at what's happening right before that behavior starts to happen to determine the cause. And this really allows our staff and allows all the staff supporting to apply a really structured scientific process to determine what causes the behavior to come out, what strategies are effective in either replacing, redirecting, or extinguishing the behavior, and then what other supports might be needed to help the student to have more expected behaviors rather than unexpected behaviors. So it really kind of brings a structure and a process to this. And another thing we can also do is not with the data is not just look at individual students, but we can look at overall trends. And we can say, oh, we know that, for example, Thursdays might be really challenging in afternoon recess. And then we can then start to unpack why is that the case, and then be much more proactive rather than just reactive, which really is exhausting for staff members, and also makes it that much more challenging for students. And for parents, of course, then you hear about it when students get home. And so what we really want to make sure as part of all of this, there's also a communication plan. So I believe strongly that if a student needs to talk to either myself or the assistant principal about a behavior, that the parent needs to hear about it before the school day is over. So you understand what happened, what was the conversation, what was the follow-up, and then you can have that conversation with your child when they get home. And really it's around this partnership that families in the school must have. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk more about classroom supports and academics. So it's really important that we have, that we talk about autonomy and alignment, and the balance that needs to be struck within our classrooms and within our school. So we want teachers to respond to the needs of their students while also building on the strengths of the students. And at the same time, we want to make sure that each classroom has a similar foundation so that students don't have widely varying experiences based on the teacher's experience, skill level, and other factors. We want to have more consistency across classrooms. And so that really brings in the importance of school systems. So here are some examples of how a teacher can have some autonomy in the classroom, and why it's important to have teacher autonomy and staff autonomy when working with students. And then here are some examples of areas that we also need to have alignment. And again, knowing, so everyone knows what to expect and what is expected of them. Now, for kind of all of this, I plan to be at Leschi for many years, but it's incredibly important that Leschi have systems in place that are not dependent on a specific person, because I'm not going to be here forever. Our teachers, there's going to be changes in turnover. And what we want is, we want the things that are working well to continue working regardless of who is doing that work. And again, that's why we implement certain systems and have these systems in place. And what this really means is there's clear communication from me to the staff, from staff with each other, from staff members to family members, and from staff members to students. And there's also a lot of work to align our staff and to generate buy-in, really to explain why this work is important. And this does involve a shift from the individual mindset to a community-based mindset. So some of the other things really about the priorities that we need to have. And I want to make sure I address, we have staff that already do a lot of this work that I've explained. And I want to make sure that I'm not minimizing their work, but rather how we need to have further alignment in this work from all staff and from all in our community. So we must address and prioritize our students who are performing the lowest in academic areas, as well as social emotional learning and behavior. We have to address that. We have to make sure that we devote resources to that. And when you look at school improvement research, the research overwhelmingly shows that schools that have improved, in which they've increased the growth of students who are performing below standard, that work actually spreads to everybody, and everyone starts making better growth. And everyone starts increasing the amount of growth they're making, and rigor is increased for all students, including students that are already meeting or exceeding standard. So really, when you look at all of the different schools that have really made lots of improvement, when you bring up the learners that need the most support, everyone benefits. And also we have to have systems in place where support teams implement and absolutely exhaust all strategies before we evaluate students for special education. We know that students who generally are evaluated and qualify for special education are overwhelmingly Black and brown students. And of those students who qualify, the Black and brown students, they overwhelmingly qualify in behavior. And so again, there's a lot of reasons why we need to have systems in place and this alignment in place. Now I want to make sure that it is still the job of our school and our staff to continually answer 4 really important questions about school, which is, what do we want students to learn? How will we measure? How will we know if students have learned it? What will we do when students struggle? And then what will we do when students have mastered the learning? So those are the 4 guiding questions that really are around the collaboration work that we need to do as a staff, and the alignment work, and the work that is already taking place at Leschi. But there just needs to be more alignment with that work. So again, I said this is short and sweet. I just want to hear some of your thoughts. And so I'd like you to give some feedback about this presentation. I'm going to post a link in the chat, and it's just going to have 3 kind of short answer questions. Your responses will be recorded anonymously, and they're going to be reviewed by myself and the building leadership team. And then I will plan on reporting back some of the themes about the feedback that we received. And I'll report on those themes at a later community meeting. So let me just pull up that link real quick. All right, well, thank you all for your time. Are there any questions, comments, concerns?
Steve, so you said the input link out with this video or with the presentation as well, or?
Yes, so I'll send that out. I'm also going to send out all the slides that I presented tonight so that the whole community has them.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, feel free to hang around. I'll hang out for a few minutes if there's any PTA related questions, but otherwise, thanks to everyone for your time. And yeah, send us any comments or thoughts on anything we talked about tonight, budget, brainstorming, etc. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, Benson.
Hey.
Do you want to talk really quick about tomorrow afternoon, about coverage of the crosswalk?
Yeah, that'd be